She was only 3 when it started. By 11, she thought abuse was love. By 14, she was pregnant. For over a decade, no one knew. Welcome to the horrors hidden in the quiet town of Kidwelly. Kidwelly, a sleepy town in South Wales nestled in Carmarthenshire, known for its Norman castle, cobbled streets, and postcard charm. But behind its peaceful face was a secret so disturbing it would shock all of Britain. Sometimes evil doesn't come with horns and fangs. Sometimes it walks in daylight wearing a robe, clutching a fake Bible, hiding behind locked doors. At the center of this nightmare stood one man, Colin Batley. To his neighbors, he was just another face on the street, a heavy-set man with tattoos, often seen walking his dogs or chatting casually over the fence. But behind the walls of his quiet house, he claimed to be a prophet. He called himself a high priest, claimed to follow a sacred religious path, a twisted belief system inspired by the notorious occultist Aleister Crowley. His so-called religion, a mix of ritual sex, black magic, and absolute control. Batley wasn't alone. He built a cult-like circle. They all helped recruit, silence, and abuse. Their base of operations? A row of ordinary-looking houses in a quiet Kidwelly estate. No temple, no hidden lair, just regular homes, turned into altars of fear. He told his victims that the rituals were sacred, that obeying him was their divine duty. But behind the spiritual language was nothing but rape, torture, and trauma. And if anyone dared to resist, Colin Batley used fear of Satan, brutal threats, and chilling predictions. He said that if they disobeyed, demons would come for them, that they would be cursed, killed. Or worse, it wasn't just manipulation, it was indoctrination. A system built to enslave children, warp their minds, and break their spirits, all under the name of some twisted religion. She was only 3 years old, just learning to speak, just learning to trust, and that trust would be the very thing used to destroy her. This little girl was born into the cult, not kidnapped, not lured, but given, handed over, by her own mother, who was already a loyal follower of Colin Batley. She never stood a chance. From her toddler years, she was told that sex with adults was sacred, a path to spiritual awakening, that it was God's will, that Colin Batley was a holy man, a prophet, a chosen one, and if she ever refused, she was told demons would come for her in the night, that Satan would drag her soul to hell, that her family would suffer. This wasn't just abuse, it was ritualized, systematic grooming, masked as spirituality. By age 5, she was already being passed around. By 9, she was forced to participate in fake ceremonies that were nothing more than orgies. And the abuse escalated into something even darker. Colin Batley told her that she had to pass a test, a sexual initiation, a ritual of obedience. If you don't do it, they warned her, you'll be handed over to the man with the horns. He waits in the shadows, watching, waiting to take girls who disobey. Subscribe to True Dark Chapter so more of these stories can be told and more lives protected. To a child, this wasn't a metaphor. It was real, a monster, a demon, and the only way to be safe was to obey. So she did. She let them do what they wanted because fear was stronger than pain. And by 11, she was completely brainwashed. Her identity was erased. She wasn't a daughter. She wasn't a child. She was property, passed around within the cult. They told me I was special, she later said in court. That suffering was part of becoming holy. By 14, she was pregnant, a result of repeated rape by cult members. She didn't even know what pregnancy meant, because no one had ever told her what normal even looked like. The people who were supposed to protect her, her own mother, the adults around her, were the very ones leading her to the altar of abuse. And Colin Batley? He stood above it all like a king, preaching Crowley's teachings, quoting scripture, and orchestrating every violation as if it were divine. This wasn't a cult hidden in the jungle. This was happening in a normal British neighborhood, behind closed doors, with candles, robes, and utter evil disguised as religion. They called him the priest, but this wasn't just one man's evil. It was a network, a twisted family of silence and control. Colin Batley wasn't alone. The cult operated from a small, quiet housing estate in Carmarthen, Wales, the last place anyone would expect a satanic sex cult. His wife, Elaine Batley, was deeply involved. She took part in rituals and even had a tattoo of an Eye of Horus, the same symbol they used in their ceremonies. Another member, Jacqueline Marling, helped recruit girls and acted as an enforcer, pressuring victims to stay silent. David Batley, Colin's adult son, was also convicted, showing just how deep the rot went in this so-called family. They created their own version of a religious hierarchy, with Colin as the high priest and others as his acolytes. Victims were ranked, controlled, and passed around like property. Some cult members were told they would be cursed or die if they ever left. Books by Aleister Crowley, especially the Book of the Law, were read during orgies and abuse rituals. This wasn't about belief, it was about dominance and fear. Before we tell you about the brave girl who escaped and exposed the cult, it's important to understand she wasn't the only one. There were others, other children, other women, all trapped in the same nightmare, all controlled through fear, rituals, and manipulation. In this part, we'll explore how the cult operated, how they used perverse ceremonies and dark beliefs to break their victims and keep them silent. Victims were told they had to prove their loyalty through sex acts. Rituals often included robes, candles, chanting, and occult symbols. Abuse was framed as sacred or a requirement to avoid demonic punishment. Girls were told they would be punished by Satan or given to worse men if they refused. Some were branded with tattoos, marking them as property of the cult. Members were isolated and cut off from outsiders. Victims were drugged, threatened, or emotionally manipulated. Colin Batley read from Aleister Crowley's The Book of the Law, twisting it to justify abuse. Violent orgies were justified as religious experiences. Those who resisted were told they would burn in hell or be sacrificed. For years, she lived under chains of fear, manipulation, and ritual abuse. But everything changed the day she became a mother. It was the birth of her child that lit a fire inside her. She realized she couldn't allow the same horrors that were done to her to ever touch her baby. She had endured years of grooming, brainwashing, and control, but she would not pass that legacy of trauma to her child. It was motherhood that gave her the courage to do the impossible, escape. She ran from the cult as a teenager, clutching the only piece of hope she had, her baby, and reported the abuse to the police. But due to the deep psychological control she had been under, it took years to fully piece together the truth. The trauma was too tangled, the memories too painful. Still, she persisted. Her bravery led to a series of breakthroughs. Authorities began investigating Colin Batley and the group he led. A police raid on Batley's home uncovered robes, occult books, ritual lists, disturbing videos, and satanic writings. Even worse, evidence of underage abuse and sex parties. It all started with one survivor, a young mother who refused to stay silent. Her courage led to multiple arrests. She not only saved herself, but paved the way for justice and protected future victims from suffering the same fate. For years, neighbors had suspected something was off about the Batley house, but no one knew just how dark it truly was. One neighbor later recalled, "She once came up to me and just asked, 'Do you want to have sex?' No hesitation. It was shocking," another said. There were always strange noises coming from that house. Chanting, shouting, like some kind of ritual, but these red flags were dismissed or ignored. The horror inside that house wasn't just hidden, it was disguised behind the veil of a suburban neighborhood. Ordinary from the outside, but behind closed doors, a nightmare was unfolding. The truth finally made it to court in 2011. After years of silence and suffering, justice caught up with Colin Batley and his cult. The trial shocked the nation. The courtroom heard horrifying details of rituals, abuse, and mind control. But it was the young woman, the survivor who had once escaped with her child, who stood at the center of it all. She took the stand, face to face with her abusers, and testified with unimaginable bravery. Her voice, once silenced, now became a weapon of truth. Colin Batley was sentenced to life in prison. The charges, child rape, abuse, and leading a depraved cult. He wasn't the only one brought to justice. His wife, Elaine Batley cult members Shelley Miller and Jackie Marling, all were convicted for their roles in the abuse. The judge didn't hold back. He called them a depraved, evil sect, a group that preyed on the most vulnerable and twisted spiritual beliefs into something monstrous. But the survivor? She was no longer a victim. She was a force. The cult's home was eventually sold, the furniture gone, the symbols erased. But for the survivors, especially the girl who had once thought pain was love, the healing had only just begun. She once said, "I thought what was happening to me was normal. I thought abuse was love." That belief had been beaten and brainwashed into her from childhood. But now, she was free and determined never to let that cycle continue. Today, her identity remains protected. She lives somewhere far from her past, working to rebuild her life step by step, as a mother, as a survivor, as someone who turned her deepest trauma into the courage to save others. She escaped the cult, but the scars remain, and yet, so does her strength. Real evil doesn't always wear a cloak or hide deep in a forest. Sometimes it lives right next door. Sometimes the monsters tuck their shirts in, smile at neighbors, and mow their lawns on Sunday. And sometimes a child has to save herself because no one else will. But even in the darkest places, one voice can shatter silence. That brave girl, now a survivor, spoke up. And in doing so, she ended a cycle that could have swallowed generations. So always listen to survivors. Believe them. Protect them. Fight for them. Speak out. Be loud. Because silence feeds monsters.